Welcome back to the Pagan Perspective. I'm your Wednesday host, Diaka, and this week we have a two-part topic. The first dealing with how, you talk with or educate somebody who doesn't practice magic and who might have some ideas at thinking that it's evil or things like that. And the second, how you would protect yourself from how was it worded? From negative entities. So, the full topic is going to be in the description bar if you want to go ahead and read that. But I'm just going to go ahead and jump into it. I think that there's an interesting tie between both of these for me when I was looking at it. And that is thinking about the frameworks that we use to understand the world. And when we're talking with somebody who is coming from a different religion, often from a Christian background or something like that, they may have a very different way of looking at and understanding the world. And it can be tricky to sometimes it can be tricky to have a real meaningful conversation when the two people or the multiple parties involved are not aware that they are using different frameworks to understand the world. And those are sort of like accents, one could think, because one usually doesn't notice an accent until it's different from their own or different from what they're expecting to hear. But we forget about our own accents when we're speaking with them, unless there's a reason for it to be pointed out. So the way that we look at the world, which is also a learned and practiced behavior, is very similar. Unless we are looking for it, we're not always conscious of the framework that we're using. So Kayla or Kyla, I'm not sure on the pronunciation, talked a little bit about some of the details with that, and one of the details being that the other person involved has been a Christian since then, and that framework, most forms of Christianity do understand the world as being divided into good and evil. And again, I'm saying most because that's definitely not all. Christianity is a very, very wide umbrella. But many forms of paganism, again, not all, don't necessarily see the world in the good and evil, and doesn't necessarily see magic as being a good or evil thing, but rather a tool that can be used for different purposes. And that difference in worldview might be a good place to start in a discussion. Not always, but I think that the understanding that there is a difference and that those differences are valid, though both understandings are valid, is a really good place to start for coming to an understanding. Now, in terms of framework, moving on to the second one, my worldview, my framework doesn't really include, well, it actually would kind of depend on how one interprets this, because the question is, how do you choose to protect yourself against or prevent negative entities? And then it talks a little bit more about, paranormal investigation and that sort of thing. I don't usually understand the world in terms of there being spirits or metaphysical entities or things like that. I don't. I would like to keep keep it open that perhaps there are, but that is not how I experience. That's not how I relate to the world. That's not really how I look at it. If it turns out that there are, well then, I'd stand corrected. But I'm not concerned that other folks look at it that way and understand the world with negative entities or bad spirits or things like that. So that isn't really included in my framework. But if we talk about entities as other people, who might be throwing their energy around, who might be doing harmful, hateful, hurtful things, that's something that I do prepare myself for. And especially when I know that I might be going into a situation where I would be encountering people like that, or people who are behaving in that way at that moment. Not to say that they are always behaving that way, but using some simple visualization techniques, and really being present in myself, working on my own reactions as a way to address that and deal with that is what I would focus on out of that. But in terms of thinking about literal evil spirits or things like that, again, that's just not something that is part of my practice, so I don't have a lot of useful things to say about that. So, excuse me. So yeah, that is my take this week. And the viewer mentions that they've been keeping up with the channel for about 3 or 4 years now, so we always really appreciate that. And all of the participation and support that you guys give us, it really means a lot, and we're, at least for my part, very grateful and happy to be a part of this community.